All right. Hey there, Facebook. Eder Campuzano of the Oregonian and Oregon Live.
Hey, this is Selena Tibor with the Oregonian, Oregon Live.
And we are in downtown Portland in front of the Mark Hatfield Federal Courthouse. Well, that's the Justice Center, but the courthouse is right behind that. And there's another federal building over here. It's, oh, look at that. It is just after 7 p.m. There's another round of protests tonight, and we're gonna talk about just this geographical area where demonstrations are going into their 64th consecutive day in downtown Portland. Oh, Linda, don't worry, we will be safe. It looks like state police have roped off the area where demonstrators usually congregate beforehand. So on a typical night, this would actually, well, this right here would actually probably not have very many people in it. Demonstrators typically gather over there. But as you may have read on our news site, OregonLive.com, or others, Governor Kate Brown recently reached a deal with federal police where they began sort of a staged winding down of their presence here as Oregon State Police sort of secure the area around the demonstrations, which, as you can see, the federal courthouse is still pretty laden with graffiti from the many, many demonstrations that have happened here. So if you've got any questions at all, feel free to ask us. About a week, 2 weeks ago, what is time? Who knows these days? We published a story that kind of laid out the geographical area here and how it relates to the 145 square miles that this city actually encompasses. So there was a statue of a pioneer family up on that pedestal up until just a few nights ago. If you remember the iconic elk fountain statue, that's where it used to be after it being sort of tagged with graffiti and fires lit in a grate beneath it. City officials removed it so that it would no longer be vandalized. And here you kind of see the beginning stages of what the demonstrations look like every day. So for the longest time, up until about the 4th of July, this was the main area of demonstrations where, after the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police, protests broke out across the country. And here in Portland, they were aimed at, police headquarters down here. And so if you'll recall, over the last few years, there have actually been several demonstrations as Portlanders actually have died in police custody. And, that is also kind of fed into the movement. Now, a lot of groups that turned out for those demonstrations would kind of converged and came out here. So really, this is really where, if you've watched any, Fox News or other sort of more partisan media outlets, this is basically where you see things happening. There was for a while a group that met at Revolution Hall on the east side of the river and would march to different sites, have speeches. Sometimes those marches would end up here. But as you can see, and as we've reported pretty extensively, those demonstrations have long since wound down. And it really was after the 4th of July weekend, pretty much, that protesters down here were demonstrating against the presence of federal police. Bill, we will be walking around. So the point of this Facebook Live is to give you an idea of the geography of where demonstrations happen in Portland. And I should have warned you all that there might be some language down here as people shout at police. But as you'll see, we've got plainclothes uniform state police down here now. Some 100 odd federal police have left the city as part of that deal between the governor and the federal government. And part of that was negotiated between Kate Brown and Vice President Mike Pence. So as we kind of survey the land here and take a look at the demonstrations as they sort of begin, going to throw it to Selena over here, who can tell you, as a lifelong Portlander, how often do people come down here?
Not often. This area is mainly just comprised of federal buildings and businesses, and so people really don't hang out here. Typically, it's normally used as a workplace. I've lived here my entire life for 20 years straight, and never have I come to this area to really do anything. It's just not a really popular area, and the focus on it has been very recent over the past couple of months.
Yeah, so if you see that group of red buildings over there, that's Essex House. At the bottom floor there is a Starbucks. Behind it is Coin Tower. And, you know, a few blocks to the left of that is where the Oregonian offices are. That's where I work. And I'll be honest with you, I come down here during the non-pandemic times maybe once every other week, and it's mostly to cut through the parks to get to Qdoba, which is a couple of blocks that way. But yeah, again, this is pretty much what you can anticipate during the day. People going about their business, getting ready for protests. And right here is the fence that the feds put up to kind of protect the courthouse from further graffiti. And, you know, there were folks throwing fireworks that kind of instigated some of the police response. But this right here really is, for the last few weeks, where demonstrators have focused their attention, just because it's mostly been, on this end, a place to rally against the federal police being in Portland. Whereas down there, again, as you can see in front of the Justice Center, that's where folks were demonstrating against police brutality, which was and has been sort of the central focus of these demonstrations. I mean, there have been demonstrations down here every single night against police brutality. There's just also been a secondary mission down here when the federal police intervened and came down here to say, feds, get out. And so that's what's happening here right now.
Lives are real.
And so you're going to see people who come out here and, again, still rail against the presence of federal police on these blocks, because the federal police, even though about 100 more than 100 have pulled out, then there are still plenty who remain to, you know, protect the courthouse. So there's a bit of politics involved there, which you can read about on our website and others. And so this over here is, we're at the corner of Southwest 3rd and Salmon. And so this is where a lot of folks also pile up. And again, you know, one of the pretty consistent messages you've heard from protesters is that they're not going to go anywhere until they see reform. And there you go. Here you go. We'll just listen to this. See. And there you go. That's, again, that has been the message since day one down here. And it's all been all about Black Lives Matter. And so one of the sort of de-escalation tactics that state police have adopted, you know, there was a lot of backlash. And frankly, there has been a lot of backlash over the years, because Portland police, typically when there are demonstrations and when they're cutting off streets and when they're looking to kind of divert demonstrations before they hit major arterial roads, come out in riot gear with batons. And that, a lot of demonstration organizers say, sort of just antagonizes the crowd and, you know, whips folks into a fury, because the way that demonstrators feel is, if there's, you know, no major action, you know, physical action on the part of the protesters, and why are police dressed that way? And so one of the de-escalatory tactics that the state police, state troopers, have agreed to is to kind of come out in plain clothes. So there's that. I'm trying to keep up with the questions here. If people waiting in line for a new iPhone? No, there's nobody waiting for a new iPhone because, well, there's no new iPhone. So let's see. Selena, do you have anything else to add? You covered at least a couple of the demonstrations that began on the other side of the river. What did those look like? What did you see?
I mean, those were pretty peaceful. I was covering these protests kind of in the first couple of weeks. Now we're approaching our 64th day. And those were the protests when people laid down on the Burnside Bridge for 9 minutes to protest against the death of George Floyd. And from what I saw, they were extremely peaceful. This was before the feds came. And there was really large crowds in the thousands. And those crowds kind of died down a little bit, became smaller and smaller over time. But then when the federal officers were sent to Portland by President Trump, those crowds really just grew again, and they probably reached their peak again maybe a week or so ago. We saw crowds of thousands, and then I guess we'll see tonight how many people come out.
Right on. So yeah, once again, I'm Edgar Campuzano. This is Selena Tibor with the Oregonian and Oregon Live, and we're giving you a tour of downtown Portland, where in about 6 to 9 blocks, protests typically happen on a nightly basis. Tonight is going to be... There are people here, they're ready to demonstrate, and you'll likely see some protest action. But our main goal down here is to give you a bit of a geography lesson of where everything happens, because I'm going to walk you over to this corner over here, next to this Zoom Care, and show you that right here you have the Multnomah County Courthouse. Right behind it is the Portland Building. Right behind that is City Hall. That's Lonsdale Square. Behind it is Chapman Square. Behind that is Terry Shrunk Plaza. Over there is the federal courthouse. Next to that is the Justice Center, and next to that is another federal building, which we just walked past. 9 blocks. There's an apartment building behind the other federal building, and then Coin Tower behind that. So really, that is where you see most of the footage of Portland protests that you might find on national or partisan TV networks. And really, that's it. In a city of about 145 square miles, that's where you see everything.
And you'll find that around downtown, a lot of businesses do have boards against their windows, like you can see here. All the windows are boarded up, and that's kind of happening across town. At the beginning of the protests, there were a few downtown businesses that were broken into, had their windows smashed, but recently, and honestly over the past month or so, we haven't seen a ton of action outside of this small area. And a lot of businesses are keeping their windows boarded up, I think just for protection, but we really haven't seen any businesses being broken into recently, I would say.
Okay, yeah, and there's no doubt that some of the businesses down here might have boarded up their windows in response to the downtown area, the demonstrations that happen down here. And maybe it might help. I hear a lot of you guys saying that you can't really hear Selena. Maybe she'll stand where I stand so that you can hear me. I'm also kind of a loudmouth, so that might have something to do with why you might be able to hear me. So that's the Zoom Care. And here's a parking structure that obviously is not accepting any people parking right now. A jeweler. And so right now where we're going is we are a block away from the section of Portland where demonstrations are about to enter their 64th consecutive evening since the death of George Floyd. And again, this is what downtown Portland, immediately surrounding the federal courthouse, City Hall, the Portland Building. Oh, hi, buddy. I'm sorry. I'm in your space, aren't I? But yeah, this is what this area of downtown Portland looks like. We're going to take you down to Pioneer Courthouse Square. But
face in there. Let me get a couple dollars.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have any
Let
cash
get
on me.
A couple dollars, nigga.
I don't.
You just got my face.
And there you go. There's
I'm gonna snatch your shit on
the
camera.
7-Eleven.
I'm gonna snatch your shit on camera.
No, please don't.
Let me get a couple dollars.
I don't have any cash on me, buddy. All right. So that was the 7-Eleven. As you can see, it's a little boarded up right now. And now begins closing at 11 p.m. Somebody just asked if there are any uniformed police in the squares where protests happen. Yes, there are Oregon State Police right now in Lonsdale and Chapman Squares, which is where people have been congregating during the demonstrations. Chapman Square has been kind of a staging area. A couple of nights ago when I was down here covering the evening's events, people were just kind of milling around there waiting for a rally to happen in front of the Justice Center. But in front of the federal courthouse in Lonsdale Square, that's where Riot Ribs, an organization that literally just fed anyone who came by with the aim of helping the homeless population down here, was stationed. And, there was kind of a Eugene Country Fair vibe in that neck of the woods. So right now we're about to pass and walk by the Apple Store, which has been shuttered for quite a few weeks, ever since, I believe, night 2 or 3 of demonstrations in Portland, where police did declare a riot and there was some looting downtown. The Apple Store was the target of some of that looting, after which, you could still see some of the broken windows there. Well, Rick, this is really pretty much the extent of it. You'll see that some people have gotten pretty creative with the plywood here, and the Apple Store leadership. I mean, I believe Apple has decided to just leave this up as a monument to what's happening down here. But yeah, you will see this mural as a tribute to Portlanders and other Black folks who have died in recent years through gun violence or in police custody. There's Keaton Otis, there's Tamir Rice, there's Trayvon Martin, Quantis Hayes. He was a Portlander. Carlos Hunter, Matthew Burrows, Spider-Man's up there for some reason, Alton Sterling, Kendra James, Jason Washington, another Portlander who died in a scuffle kind of outside of a Portland State University area bar, and he was shot and killed by Portland State Police. Tony McDade, Andre Gladen, and here Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and I thought I saw George Floyd. Oh yeah, he's right down there. So yeah, this has kind of become a mural to the folks who lost their lives due to gun violence, particularly during racist incidents or in police custody. There's a little bit more over here. There's a mural of Tupac Shakur. And so this here is Pioneer Courthouse, or Pioneer Place, like the mall down here. And it is also currently boarded up. So what you see right now, actually, if you've heard a figure of $23 million, right? The interim Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security tossed that number out. $23 million is what Portland businesses have sustained, the harm that businesses have sustained because of protests. Well, that is actually inaccurate. It's closer to, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but maybe our social team can link to Everton Bailey's excellent story that outlines just how that number came about. And it was because of a survey. Mostly this shopping center right here is where the bulk, I want to say about $18 million of that lost revenue came from. And that $18 million is due to COVID closures. So the lost revenue that downtown businesses have felt as a result of the last few months is largely due to people not wanting to come down because of coronavirus. This, in my experiences, has been kind of an outlier, and folks mostly come out here to hang out in front of the murals and admire them. Selena, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience down here in this neck of the woods?
Yeah, definitely. So this mall has been dying for a little bit. There hasn't been too much business here And while a lot of people do come down to hang out, again, this isn't really a super popular area in comparison to some of the other areas in Portland. And as you can see right now, there's not very many people here anyway. And the people that are here, a lot of them, it looks like, are here, like Eder said, to admire the murals and support Black Lives Matter. So yeah, it's just not super popular right now, and it hasn't been for quite a while, which may have also been a reason why this mall was losing so much money, in addition to the COVID closures.
And for those of you just joining us, my name is Eder Campuzano. I'm the education reporter for the Oregonian, and I'm joined by one of our summer interns, Selena Tibor, who sadly leaves us tomorrow. And we're just kind of giving you a guided tour of where protests happen and where they don't. This is where they don't, for the most part, in downtown Portland. So this area of the city saw some action kind of in the early goings of the demonstrations, shortly after the death of George Floyd. But folks really aren't coming down here to demonstrate much anymore. So for those asking why we're not out at 10 p.m., it's because I've been out a few times this week already and kind of have an early bedtime. But we will have a live update blog on OregonLive.com, as we have for the last 63 days, where you can see everything that's happening down by the federal courthouse. So Pioneer Courthouse, one of the historic buildings downtown, has been boarded up. Part of that is due to the nature of some of the demonstrators who were down here in the early goings of the protests. And so we're about to make our way down to Pioneer Courthouse Square, where for a good chunk of late May, early June, a group of folks would lead demonstrations in the thousands. I believe they topped out at about 10,000 one night, and start at Revolution Hall across the river and end up here sometimes. And so we've got some stunning photographs, if you care to look back at them, from late May, early June, or, in COVID time about a decade ago, that sees this square just jam-packed with people protesting in kind, demonstrating against police brutality and systemic racism after the death of George Floyd. So this is what Pioneer Courthouse Square looks like right now, and it's been pretty much untouched by demonstrations recently. Again, you might have heard a $23 million figure of what businesses have lost in the last couple of months, and that is largely due to COVID closures. I mean, you can't really have a booming business district without business because people are afraid of a highly transmittable virus. And that really is like the long and short of it. The reason why you don't see very many people down here during the day, at night, is because of the COVID. It also doesn't help that, restaurants and bars can't stay open, until 2 a.m. anymore. So there's this area, aside from being a hub of commerce in the best of times, is also where people who work in office buildings tend to, that's a hotel, that's not an office building. But yeah, this is where people who work in office buildings tend to go. So I can tell you from experience working at the Oregonian, I work from home all but maybe once a week, twice a week. And my usual lunch places just do not have the volume or capacity that they used to, partly because of COVID rules, but also because people are not working from their offices anymore. So you've got a big hit to businesses down here that's born mostly of the fact that their regular clientele, their regular customers just are not down here anymore. And so that's kind of how that little number relates to the protest. Again, you might see a faulty $23 million number floating around that people say businesses have lost because of the protests, and that is patently not the case. Again, our great City Hall reporter, Everton Bailey, wrote an illuminating story that told you about the methodology for the survey that number came from. And yeah, it was basically from Pioneer Place saying people aren't coming down because of COVID, and it's lost us this much in daily revenue for the last X weeks. So I hope that that's a little illuminating for you all. Let's see, where else can we take you? It is just about to be 7:30 p.m. Does anyone have any burning questions? Because I know you've got plenty. Would you mind opening up Facebook on your phone and seeing what questions people have? Yeah, no, it's pretty sad. Up there is, if any of you have had the pleasure where Departure is, it's a great bar to get a good view of the city, which you can't do right now because of the COVID, especially at night. One of our favorite places to go. Oh, wait, no, that's Departure up here. Wrong place. I'm sorry. And Muji, always a good place for a long lunch stroll. Don't tell my editors. Every once in a while, it's just fun to come and hang at the Muji to get your mind off things. And once again, here's Pioneer Courthouse, the Pioneer Courthouse. Judy, we will not be live streaming tonight because I and a lot of my colleagues have a philosophy against live streaming during demonstrations. I'll tell you right now that my live streams have been spread or kind of like hijacked by bad faith actors. Video clips that I post on Twitter have been taken out of context and kind of posted other places and sliced and diced to make things look like they are not. So I do not like putting unfiltered video on Twitter for people to steal. I would rather feed that into our website. On Oregon Live, everything's kind of protected by copyright and much harder to slice and dice and take without some kind of repercussion. So that's why I like to put things out there, because I really don't like bad actors taking my stuff and running wild with it. So there's the Nike store, again, boarded up. And again, you'll see that most of the plywood that businesses have put up since the protests began and since they had to shut down due to the COVID are now murals of so many things.
Someone is asking, now that the federal police presence has left, are the Portland police going to be back on the streets?
Oh, so that is a question that I do not have the answer to. There's Breonna Taylor. So some of you are asking if now that the federal police that many of them have vacated the city, if Portland police will be patrolling downtown. Right now, there's a handful of Oregon State Police at Lonsdale Square and in Chapman Square. The entire area is roped off, so maybe we'll go back there with you now that you've gotten a good look at the Pioneer Courthouse, Pioneer Place, Pioneer Courthouse Square. We'll go back down to where the protests usually happen and give you a look at what's going on down there. It's roped off. Typically, there would be tons of people in tents and grilling in Lonsdale Square in anticipation of the evening's demonstrations, but that is not happening right now. Because again, police have roped off the area. And again, there's the Apple Store, which was looted very early during the demonstrations. And we will say this about, anytime you hear about looting in Portland, it's a reference to one of the first 3 or 4 days of demonstrations, protests against police brutality down here following the death of George Floyd. And if you hear about looting in Portland, it's literally just that night that happened. So if you hear anyone popping off about looting and rioting, police have declared a riot a handful of times in Portland due to the protests. But the vast majority of evenings have been free of that declaration. And we do get a lot of folks who, say, call them riots, call them rioters. And we simply, as a news organization, do not do that, folks. we abide by a set of ethical standards that requires us not to label people as, well, as criminals if they have not broken a law or if they haven't definitively done something. And because rioting is against the law, we are going to refrain from using that term to describe anyone or anything. We're not going to call anybody a rioter. We're not going to call anything a riot until police do so. And when police do so, we'll say that police declared a riot because, again, we are not the authority. And honestly, calling somebody a rioter on a live stream or in a story would open us up to a libel or slander suit because we're pronouncing somebody guilty when they're not. So that's a short journalism 101 lesson there. Another thing that I'll tell you about the way that we do things at the Oregonian and that credible reporters do is that we will never, we'll always announce ourselves as reporters and journalists before we talk to anybody. So when I speak to somebody at a demonstration, they know that I'm a reporter. They know I'm with the Oregonian. I'm either wearing an Oregonian shirt or my press credential is hanging around my neck. Or when I walk up, and often I do, even though I'm wearing everything, I will tell them, hi, I'm a reporter with the Oregonian, and I would like to talk to you about the protests and what you're doing down here. So there's, again, another piece of journalism 101. What are other people asking, Selena?
Someone was saying that they can't hear too much commotion or voices going on outside of yours. So is there actually a lot of noise right now in downtown Portland where we are?
There is not too much noise in downtown Portland, and I'll tell you again, that's because of the fact that people aren't really down here because of the coronavirus. If you were with us a little bit earlier, you know that we got kind of accosted down here at the 7-Eleven, so we're going to cross the street real quick because somebody really doesn't want to be on camera. And you know what? If he doesn't want to be on camera, we will grant him that courtesy. Again, here are the murals in the Apple Store. They were put up after the riot, one of the first evenings of the demonstrations, and there was some looting down here. And there you go. And again, this is where we're about to go. Return to is a 9, and that's being generous, about a 9-block area of the city that is federal and city and county buildings, in a city of about 145 square miles. What's up?
Another question. Some people are asking if these buildings are not all being looted, why are they boarded up?
If these buildings are not being looted, then why are they boarded up? Well, I'll tell you, it's because folks are afraid.
Let me get my shit, bitch.
Oh, no, I am not
No,
in.
what's up, nigga?
I'm not
My
there.
dollar, nigga, if I suck through your face, nigga.
All right, so that place right there was broken into. And, I'm sure as a jewelry store, you're taking every precaution necessary when there are lots of people downtown and you're closed, not around your building, so that it doesn't happen again.
One other thing worth noting is that a lot of buildings across the city are being boarded up, even on the other side of the river, even in areas that aren't in downtown necessarily. So there's not a clear reason why all of these businesses are being boarded up outside of downtown, but it's not just happening in the area with the protests.
There you go. And so here you go. We are back at Lonsdale Square, and this is where Oregon State Police have staged after a good 100 or so federal police have left. And so the feds were here, and they still are. There is still a portion of Federal Protective Services, and that's federal police, down here protecting the federal courthouse. And who you see out here is Oregon State Police and state troopers, who it's kind of in negotiations between Oregon Governor Kate Brown and Vice President Mike Pence to kind of de-escalate the pretty consistent sort of police uses of force and a lot of the scenes that you saw down here, and specifically this portion of the city, Oregon State Police have replaced a lot of those federal police as part of that deal. And one of their de-escalation tactics is that you'll notice the state police are wearing, you know, regular uniforms. They're not in riot gear. And that was one of the ways that, well, you know, that was a grievance that demonstrators had, was that if federal police or any police really showed up in riot gear, that meant that they were trying to quell a riot when there wasn't one to begin with. So there's some insight at the intentions and kind of what demonstrators thought of the so-called occupation of Portland by federal police. So there's something going on down here that I can kind of hear, but I kind of can't. But all of the, or most of the state police who were in Lonsdale Square are now in Chapman Square. And so Chapman Square, huh? Oh, those are Portland police. I'm sorry. Those are Portland police. I am a moron, and I beg your pardon. But yes, Portland police cleared these squares out, and I'm sorry, I thought that I saw state police on the backs of these folks while they were hanging out in the square. And again, what you see back there is City Hall. Here's the Portland building, the Multnomah County Courthouse, Lonsdale Square, Chapman Square, Terry Shrunk Federal Plaza, the Justice Center, the Marco Hatfield Federal Courthouse, and another federal building right there. Nikki, there's no... How much looting do you see happening right now, my friend? Because there is none, and there really only was one evening about 2 months ago. So you can stop with the looting right now, because it's not happening. I do not have the definition to a riot, but if my friend Selena over here can look it up, we can give you the, you know, the legal definition of a riot and when police will declare a riot here in a second. So again, right now, what you see is not indicative of what happens here at night. And to be quite honest, we have no idea what's going to happen tonight, because this roped off area is usually where demonstrators start congregating around now, actually. So that empty square that you see over there, very far away, that is where there would be people barbecuing and where you'd see folks congregating ahead of a demonstration in front of the federal courthouse over there. Portland police this morning cleared the entire thing out, again, as part of the deal with the federal government to keep that building back there from, further damage. The building that I'm training the camera on right now, where you see all these police right now, is the Justice Center, and that's a city building. So during the evening hours, what usually happens, and it's been interesting as somebody who has reported on protests in Portland for a good 4 years almost, there is a definite rhythm to what happens down here. So what happens down here is that kind of behind that building, people will begin staging. And there would already, if this were any other day, be folks kind of hanging out in Chapman and Lonsdale squares. And they would be over there in front of the federal courthouse. They would be protesting against the presence of federal police in the city. So that was the rhythm that had basically taken place since right after 4th of July, when President Trump sent those federal police down after he signed that executive order to protect monuments when people were toppling statues of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. Both of those were in Portland, and others across the country signed that Monument Act, and pretty soon there were federal police in Portland protecting the federal courthouse. And that's what people were protesting over there, in that square over there. Whereas for the nights before that, so prior to the 4th of July, people were also congregating down here, but also there were satellite protests that started usually at Revolution Hall across the river, and drawing thousands of people who were demonstrating against police brutality and systemic racism following the death of George Floyd. And so some of those demonstrators would end up down here, Some of them would already be down here. And what you would see would be tense standoffs between some protesters and police, where the demonstrators would, hurl things at police. Some of them would. And police would respond with a show of force that some would say was, over and above what protesters were doing, right? So protesters were throwing water bottles and some such other projectiles like that. But the demonstrators would argue that, when you're in full riot gear and you're hit by a water bottle or a half-full water bottle, does it really make sense to advance on a crowd and fire tear gas or, deploy other crowd-controlling munitions?
I have part of an answer.
Yes.
About what constitutes a riot. I haven't been able to find an exact definition, but Portland police declared a riot, for example, on July 26th. And they said that was because of the conduct of the people in the crowd and the fact that they gave repeated warnings that anyone who remained there might be subject to arrest and may be subject to force. So that's not a very precise definition, but that is Portland police's reasoning for why they declared it a riot.
Okay. So if you didn't hear that, Portland police declared a riot after they had repeatedly told people to disperse and they just didn't. And what were the other conditions, Selena?
Well, one was just the conduct of the people in the crowd, which is a very vague statement. And then they also just told people that they were subject to arrest and subject to force if they didn't leave the area.
There you go. So interestingly enough, what you see here is a pretty empty Terry Shrunk Plaza. What usually happens here, and this was actually the site of a lot of Black Lives Matter protests in the early goings of these demonstrations. But in my experience, what I've usually been down here for is sort of right-wing freedom of speech, and I'm putting that in quotes, freedom of speech rallies that often attracted, some folks who were a little or a lot bent on all-out brawling with counter-demonstrators who came down here. And it's really interesting that a lot of the rhetoric that you heard in this plaza from right-wing demonstrators that would come visiting from Vancouver saying that Portland's a cesspool, that, the liberals have run this town into the ground and that it's just overrun by corruption or what have you, and filth, is exactly the kind of rhetoric that you saw out of some right-wing commentators and public figures and politicians who said that that was justification for federal police coming down here to kind of quell demonstrations. So it's all just, I don't know, it's very interesting. I have been connecting those dots is just, I don't know. All right, and so what you'll see here is, again, we are just across the street from Lonsdale Square, or Chapman Square, and this is the Justice Center. And this is where demonstrations would kind of start off every day. Down there is Chapman Square and the federal courthouse, and again, that's where protesters would stage and start their nightly demonstrations. In the early goings, and primarily, overwhelmingly, against police brutality and systemic racism, and then later against federal presence, the presence of federal officers in Portland after they were sent here by President Donald Trump. So if you look over here, the Reimagine Oregon campaign, we at least first caught word of it here, and that was when some folks who were speaking on behalf of the organization, and it's a series of measures that state and local governments are taking on, to acquiesce to the requests of activists saying that they want to dismantle racist systems in Oregon and in their communities. And so that is kind of a series of actions and policy prescriptions that are being worked out between lawmakers, again, at the county, state, and city levels, with folks who have been turning out. And that is one of the reasons why you're going to see a lot of people down here really pushing. So I spoke with one of the organizers of the demonstration a couple of nights ago, and what she said was that people should be ready to come down here every single night until those demands are met. And the presence of demonstrators down here is a show to lawmakers saying there's support for these policies, give them to us or we will not stand down. And so that's the thinking there. And that's what, for anyone who says, what are these protests for? Well, we do have a pretty concise timeline on OregonLive.com of some of the sort of results that these demonstrations, in more than 2 months now, have brought to the city and the state. So there's a series of police accountability measures that are making their way through the state legislature. In Portland, plenty of superintendents and the chief of police and the mayor have announced the end of the school resource officer program, which has been kind of a flashpoint for a lot of students, particularly students of color, in recent months. And so that's another kind of win, I guess you would notch for the movement down here, as well as about $15 million diverted from the Portland police budget in the latest budget vote that goes toward public services now. And so now you've got folks also kind of showing up with what their message is. And so this fence that you see right here is a semi-recent addition. Federal police put that fence up in order to ensure that folks wouldn't, tag or further damage the outside of the courthouse here. I'm going to show you these concrete blocks only started going up a couple of days ago. These concrete blocks on the back are a little bit older. And again, this has all been measures to reinforce this fence so that people wouldn't go and vandalize the courthouse. And that's what you see right now. And that's kind of where we are. So to kind of recap for you guys, I am Edric Campuzano, education reporter for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. This is
Selena Tibor with the Oregonian, Oregon Live.
And we just gave you a little geography lesson of the area in downtown Portland where demonstrations have happened for the last 63 nights, are entering their 64th night today. And the state of things right now is that just yesterday was the last night that a sizable number of federal police were stationed here. At least that's what we'd reported. That's what we'd been told. As Governor Kate Brown and the Department of Homeland Security had negotiated an eventual withdrawal of federal police in Portland. Now, the federal police came down here soon after 4th of July on President Trump's orders to protect federal property. And that action came after Portland protests were continually kind of winding down. Prior to the July 4th holiday, you caught maybe a crowd of 100 to 200, 300 people down here where previously there were thousands. And, it's largely because demonstrators had seen things that had seen progress. I just listed off some of those things, such as the school resource officer program ending, budget cuts to Portland police, and bills making their way through the legislature, police accountability bills. And you've definitely had other demonstrations happening in other parts of the city, primarily in front of the union offices for the rank and file Portland police, other precincts across the river, that got a little bit heated. Prior to the July 4th weekend, again, demonstrations were dwindling down here. It was the presence of federal police that really wound people up and got people turning out again and even more. So at one point there were, as we reported and several other news outlets reported, about 2,000 people down here demonstrating both against the federal presence and, as always, and it's been, this has been kind of the message down here for the entirety of the run, against police brutality and systemic racism. And so now we are coming to you on almost the last day of July, as federal police have agreed to transition out of the city. State police are aiding Portland police in keeping this area basically free of vandalism and all of that. and we'll just see where it goes from here. We don't know what to expect because, again, as usually, you would have people barbecuing, people blaring music and setting up tents over there in Lonsdale Square. And Chapman Square over there is also where people would be staging, but you're not really seeing that right now because Portland police cleared out the areas early this morning and roped them off. And only until recently has Lonsdale Square been open, so you see people kind of starting there. And yeah, this is where you're going to see demonstrations. So we're going to have reporter Maxine Bernstein, who covers criminal justice and police for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. She'll be our reporter on the ground. We'll have, I believe, either Dave Killen or Beth Nakamura down here shooting photos. And we'll have our wonderful night editor, Molly Young, catching their dispatches and feeding a live blog of what's happening down here tonight, as she does every single weeknight. You know, toss her a little thanks because she's been out until 2, 3 a.m. on weeknights, you know, bringing you the latest news. And so watch OregonLive.com for updates. We don't live tweet, again, just because we don't really like bad faith actors taking our material and spreading it, slicing it, dicing it, what have you. But yeah, you'll catch us here. Other Portland media will be down here giving you all the latest of today. And yeah, Selena, anything else to add? Again, want to recap as a lifelong Portlander, how often people come down here.
Yeah, I mean,
what the state of things are.
Just to finish things off, this is probably the most amount of people I have seen in this area ever outside of protest or outside of normal times when there aren't protests going on. Just to reiterate, this area isn't, even though it's in downtown Portland and it's in the middle of the city, this isn't an area where people frequent just to socialize or to hang out. And so the crowds here in the past few weeks have really been a new addition to this part of the city. But yeah, we'll see what happens tonight. The Oregon State Police being here is a new addition. So things may be different. Things may follow the same pattern they've been following. We will just have to see, and you can follow all of our updates on OregonLive.com.
All right, thanks so much, Selena. So to close things out, again, we will have folks down here, and I'll just remind you that what you see in terms of, you know, tear gas getting deployed, in terms of crowd control munitions, this is the area of Portland where it happens. So it has happened very consistently over the last 2 months. But this right here, this kind of, even in front of me, this 3-block area of the city is where it all happens, with a few exceptions, sometimes across the river at other police precincts and at the Union Building for rank and file police officers. Things have broken out there too. But again, we're talking about 3 to 12 to maybe 15 blocks of a 145 square foot city. So, I mean, yeah, I go home and play Final Fantasy every night, actually. I'm on 7 right now, the remake, and it's pretty fun. The most that I have heard on about 40th and Division is car parades. Sunnyside School has a Black Lives Matter protest that comes by once a week. Students at Cleveland High School who began protesting against climate change and for sensible climate policy on Friday mornings in the last 2 months have switched over to a Black Lives Matter theme. There are protests in this city practically every day outside of this area, but you're not going to really see that, one, because, well, there are too many to count. 2, well, because we're all down here, and this is where arrests happen from time to time. This is where you see clashes, and it would be irresponsible for us not to be down here. We do try to cover the other protests as much as we possibly can, but you can see it starts getting louder and louder and louder, and this is the loudest it's going to be for about an hour, I want to say. But if you walk 2 to 3 blocks away from this area, you don't really hear the protests. And again, there are some residential buildings in downtown Portland, but most of it is offices. And the reason why you see like empty streets down here is because nobody's in their offices. There's a bike crew. And yeah, polling shows that most Oregonians are for the Black Lives Matter movement, believe that the police are handling them the wrong way. And there's disagreement on what the policy prescriptions and solutions are, but for the most part, this movement has support. We're going to let you all go because I'm sure that y'all have other things to do. We are going to begin interviewing people who are out here staging in other areas and getting ready to protest. So thank you so much for following us along on this little geography lesson that we gave you. And yeah, once again, thanks for reading OregonLive.com. There's our friend Mark Graves, photographer on duty today. And yeah, keep an eye on us for live updates tonight on the website, not on Twitter because we don't really do that. And again, one last thing that I'll say, and I'll get off my soapbox after this, is that a lot of the monitoring that we do in the newsroom would not be possible were it not for some of the independent journalists who are down here. Before they were live streaming, and they do tend to post frequent live updates on Twitter and other social media. And really, in a lot of cases, there are eyes where we can't be, and a lot of them do it unpaid. So we do definitely have a debt of gratitude to those folks for being eyes where, you know, not everyone can be. So that's that. Those folks don't get paid for what they do, but we appreciate them. Thanks for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. And for you reading. We'll see you next time. I'm Edric Campuzano.
This is Selena Tibor.
We're out.